What's going on? I'm KMBest, and they just nerfed Zabu and Silver Surfer, which blows the metagame wide open. Let's talk about why they did what they did, let's talk about what they actually did, and let's talk about what I would play with those cards going forward. So, I have here a couple screenshots of the post that they made on the official Marvel Snap Discord that say about what the balance updates to Zabu and Surfer are and what the logic behind doing them was. So first we'll start with today's balance changes are the first over-the-air changes to card content without using a patch. Many of you might be wondering why we're taking this action, so I'm going to walk you through some of our balance philosophy, the metrics that led to these changes, and the adjustments that we're making to Zabu and Silver Surfer. I should say, this person who is referring to themselves in the first person here is Glenn Jones, a designer for Second Dinner. It is important to note that they do explain why they balance. They say they balance so that they can acquire a diverse metagame featuring an opportunity for innovation and exploration. They say that the game is at its most fun with a large variety of viable decks. The implication here is that Zabu and Surfer prevented a large variety of viable decks from existing. Now, generally, why they balance is because they the things they're looking at, the markers of a broken card. They look at win percentage, popularity, and cube contribution. So they have like a cube rate metric internally. They also look at clusters, so the card cores, right? So like for Zabu, the example would be there's a cluster perhaps of Zabu and Darkhawk and Rockslide, or perhaps there's a cluster of Zabu and Ghost Rider and Dracula, etc., right? They look at groups of cards, or Zabu and Absorbing Man and Spider-Man. A lot of things like that. So they look at those metrics and then they say, okay, we have to do something about this. Evidently, that was enough for them to make the changes to Zabu and to Silver Surfer. So this is an important note that they didn't really want to nerf these Season Pass cards. They say, it's paramount that we protect our gameplay, but the team also takes seriously that the players trust us to be responsible stewards of our content. Thus, these nerfs are meant to tone them down, but they definitely still made these nerfs expecting these cards to be powerful in the metagame going forward. I personally believe that they will still be players in the metagame going forward. I think they're good at their jobs. I think these nerfs accomplished their goal of tuning down these Season Pass cards without making them unbelievably weak. So what are the actual nerfs? Well, here's what happened to Zabu. Zabu went from a 3-cost card that decreased the cost of 4-cost cards by 2 to a 2-cost card that decreases the cost of 4-cost cards by 1. So now he's a card you can play on turn 2 into a 4-cost card, but you do not get to do any more of these big explodey 3-4 costs on turn 6 things. They pointed that out. And as for why it's only getting nerfed now, they say that it was cluster data that pushed them to make this decision. So you see them say, in mid-January, we saw 3 distinct Zabu decks gaining steam near the top of our rankings on win rate, QB, and population, which means these decks were crushing people and were being played a ton. That's not a good sign. So that's when they knew they had to make the change. Now, the reasoning they gave for the change is that moving Zabu's cost reduction from 2 to 1 reduces the potential energy reduction of the cat. This makes it harder to hide game-winning amounts of power or empty your hand for Dracula. They specifically name-check Dracula and Spider-Man Absorbing Man as 2 things they wanted to tone down when it comes to Zabu. Now, they do also explicitly say that they still expect Zabu to still have competitive builds, and I personally agree with that sentiment. As for Silver Surfer, they said, actually has just been one of the best cards in the game since release, and they described it as the best overall deck. The Sarah Surfer list that I had in Tier 1 on my tier list only a few weeks ago. They also note that it had positive matchups against 75% of the field, which is a pretty ridiculous situation for any game to be in. They also say, and what they changed they made to Silver Surfer was they took it from a 3-cost 0-power card that gave the other 3-cost cards 3 extra power to a 3-cost 2-power card that gives your other 3-cost cards only 2 extra power. So that is a significant downgrade, but not, I think, one that's enough to take the deck out of the metagame entirely. Personally, I still consider it a solid functional deck, and I would still try to be playing it going forward. A lot of people seem to think that both of these nerfs will like delete these cards from the metagame. I don't know how true that is. In fact, I think Silver Surfer specifically is the kind of deck that got a lot farther on running cards like Cosmo and Killmonger that just sort of won some games for free than it did on just Surfer Brood things, right? And I do have a build of Silver Surfer that I would start with playing going into the next few days. Obviously, I don't think any of the builds that I'm going to show you right now are specifically hyper optimized, but they're what I would and will be playing with going forward, so that I would consider them starting points more than anything else. There's also one final note that they wanted to get across. They are not expecting this method of balanced delivery to be the way they want to keep doing it going forward. They say, our internal processes aren't designed to do these impromptu changes regularly yet, and they will often want to make more substantial changes than this tool allows, which I think means that they can't change card text, but they can change numbers, would be my guess as to what this means, because notably there's like no localization on just changing the numbers on the card. There's no localization there. So I suspect that when they say their internal processes aren't designed to do these regularly, what they mean is, you know, they can make number tweaks, but they can't make fundamental functional changes to the text of a card, is what I would expect that to mean. I am not positive, but we'll see. So, with all that said, let's talk about what decks I would play with Zabu and Silver Surfer going forward. I'll run through, I've built 3 decks. I'll run through each of them, and we'll talk about what you can swap in and swap out, and where I think they stand in the metagame. So, you might recognize this build. I have long been championing a Zabu Dino build as the most likely thing to survive the Zabu nerfs. And this deck does an admirable job at having a solid plan A while still being a functional to good Zabu deck. And I think one other thing that this deck does that might put it over the top compared to other Zabu decks is it includes Quinjet and Mystique and Moon Girl. These are sort of, Quinjet Moon Girl is an additional method of discounting things. You could even, if you really wanted to, Mystique your Zabu and go back to just how it was before the patch. This is definitely the kind of thing that I would be happy to start playing just day one. One change that we did make, this is 11 of 12 cards of the deck I used to hit Infinite, by the way. We changed America Chavez for She-Hulk here. The logic is you won't always be able to, you know, properly use the dinosaur necessarily, but if you can sort of pass into, you can go like Moon Girl with a Quinjet out into and a Zabu out into passing into just an obscene amount of stats on turn 6. That's sort of the idea here. And that the additional reason we cut America Chavez is most of the time I was just running America Chavez in this deck in order to draw Zabu earlier, but now that Zabu is a little toned down, I don't necessarily think it's worth sacrificing your turn 6 draw to draw the now nerfed Zabu. Before the nerf, Zabu was just so game-winning that you'd play him and you'd basically be like, okay, I'm winning this game. And that was worth sacrificing your turn 6 draw for. Now, I'm a little less sure. It still could be, especially given how able to fill your hand up this deck is. Maybe you're not even sacrificing that much in terms of a turn 6 draw. But for now, here's where I'd start with Zabu Dino. There's also like a little bit of a cheaper build, because I know people don't have Darkhawk, right? The Surfer build is almost exactly the same. I made a few changes. There might be a few more coming. So the first thing that really struck me about this nerf is, oh, we're probably going to have to go back to Nova Killmonger in this deck, right? We have to have more power now. Since our big power play got toned down a lot, we have to go back to playing just more strong cards. We can get away with probably a little bit less tech. For example, I took Rogue out of this, partly because I expect Zabu decks to be a smaller portion of the metagame, and that's where Rogue was good. And partly because as there's a new metagame, I don't know what tech cards you want to be playing. And partly because she's a 3-1, and I don't know if we can afford playing that anymore. But I do generally think this deck is still going to be good. It leverages the power of Cosmo and Killmonger in order to make reactive plays and then turns those reactive plays into big point plays with Silver Surfer. It's still probably pretty damn good. There are some things you can flex around in here. I think Storm might be good in these decks again. I think that Armor might be good over one of the other 2-drops if Deathwave becomes a force in the metagame again, because you get to be an Armor Cosmo deck against Deathwave. They're basically just done. And that's, I think, the real strength of Silver Surfer as a deck archetype, is that it gets to play these tech cards now. Or, I guess, it could always play them, but now, if Deathwave's bigger, they matter way more. And it gets to do this while also proactively making them stronger with Silver Surfer. This is something I was really excited to play. It's based on a build by Wwlos, WWLOS, who is one of the few players I play at my very inflated MMR. And the idea here is we're just going to use Zabu as a backup Sarah. I don't know how many 4-cost cards we can get away with here, but obviously if we play Zabu into Sarah, suddenly the Shang-Chi costs 2, the Enchantress costs 2, we can swing a lot of lanes like that. And now this deck was sort of forced out of the metagame to some degree by the existence of Zabu Darkhawk and Sarah Surfer, because those were decks that were just going too big for you to handle. And also Sarah Surfer specifically was very good at being just small enough to not be vulnerable to Shang-Chi, but just big enough that they just still put more points on the board than you. Now, might be an opening for this deck. It might still be true that Sarah Surfer forces this out of the meta, but it's definitely worth exploring, in my opinion. This is something I'm really excited to play with. And of course, there are a ton of other decks that might be impacted by this, but I just wanted to give the people that bought these cards and are wondering what they can do with them now that they've been nerfed, I just wanted to give y'all some ideas. Remember, these are all just jumping off points. These are starting points. You can find whatever it is that you want with those. I believe that you will be able to find something plausible that you can play with these cards, play with these decks, and I think they should still be good in the metagame going forward. I'll let you know if I find anything that I think is super compelling with them. And that's all from me. Remember, smash that like button, subscribe button. I love doing self-promo. I'll catch you on the next video. I'm out.